This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. 10 Democratic presidential candidates took to the stage in Detroit, Michigan, Tuesday night for the first of a two-night debate hosted by CNN. The evening was billed as the first showdown between the two leading progressives in the race, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But the two never criticized each other and spent much of the evening fending off attacks by a group of moderate rivals, including former Maryland Congressman John Delaney. This is Elizabeth Warren.
Democrats win when we figure out what is right and we get out there and fight for it. I am not afraid. And for Democrats to win, you can't be afraid either.
Congressman Delaney, your response?
So I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics.
You know, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for. Our biggest problem in Washington is corruption. It is giant corporations that have taken our government and that are holding it by the throat. And we need to have the courage to fight back against that. And until we're ready to do that, it's just more of the same.
Most of the two Democratic primary debates began with an extended discussion on health care. This is CNN's Jake Tapper.
Senator Sanders, let's start with you. You support Medicare for all, which would eventually take private health insurance away from more than 150 million Americans in exchange for government-sponsored health care for everyone. Congressman Delaney just referred to it as bad policy, and previously he has called the idea political suicide that will just get President Trump reelected. What do you say to Congressman Delaney?
You're wrong. Right now, we have a dysfunctional health care system, 87 million uninsured or underinsured, $500,000 Americans every year going bankrupt because of medical bills, 30,000 people dying while the healthcare industry makes tens of billions of dollars in profit. 5 minutes away from here, John, is a country. It's called Canada. They guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a human right. They spend half of what we spend. And by the way, when you end up in a hospital in Canada, you come out with no bill at all. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. I believe that. I will fight for that.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Congressman Delaney?
Well, I'm right about this. We can create a universal health care system to give everyone basic health care for free, and I have a proposal to do it. But we don't have to go around and be the party of subtraction and telling half the country who has private health insurance that their health insurance is illegal. My dad, the union electrician, loved the health care he got from the IBEW. He would never want someone to take that away. Half of Medicare beneficiaries now have Medicare Advantage, which is private insurance, or supplemental plans. It's also bad policy. It'll underfund the industry. Many hospitals will close, and it's bad policy.
Senator Warren?
So look, let's be clear about this. We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points in order to talk with each other about how to best provide that health care. Now, I want to have a chance to tell the story about my friend Addie Barkin. Addie is 35 years old. He has a wife, Rachel. He has a cute little boy named Carl. He also has ALS, and it's killing him. Addie has health insurance, good health insurance. This is somebody who has health insurance and is dying. And every month, he has about $9,000 in medical bills that his insurance company won't cover. His wife, Rachel, is on the phone for hours and hours and hours begging the insurance company, please cover what the doctors say he needs. He talks about what it's like to go online with thousands of other people to beg friends, family, and strangers for money so he can cover his medical expenses. The basic profit model of an insurance company is taking as much money as you can in premiums and pay out as little as possible in health care coverage. That is not working for Americans across this country.
So that is Senator Elizabeth Warren, and before that, former Congressmember Delaney and Bernie Sanders. We begin today's show in Michigan, where the first of the 2 nights of the presidential primary debate are taking place. But we're going to Ann Arbor to speak with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. He ran for governor in Michigan last year, and in September of 2018, he founded the Political Action Committee Southpaw Michigan to help elect other progressive candidates in Michigan. So, Doctor, they started with health care. Your response?
That is the place to start. I spent the last 18 months of my life while I was running talking to people about the issues that they talk about with their families at the dinner table. And there is no doubt that among folks who are suffering chronic diseases, the kind that most Americans are suffering from, they are frustrated with a private health insurance system that is just not working for them. Instead, it's working for the CEOs who are making tens of millions of dollars a year on a system that is intended to squeeze profits out of people who are sick, and that's just not working. And so if we don't have real solutions to that problem, then the question has to be, what are we doing here?
And Dr. El-Sayed, in terms of some of the moderate Democratic candidates kept pointing to the existing private health insurance system that many people were satisfied, especially union negotiated plans. But the reality is that there are major problems, as both Senator Sanders and Elizabeth Warren said, about not only the skimpiness of some of this coverage, but also the complexity, what people have to go through to get their insurance companies to pay bills.
Yeah, so, there's this Republican talking point that unfortunately has crept into the mouths of a lot of quote unquote moderate Democrats. And it says that progressives want to take away your health insurance. Now, here's the thing. I love ice cream. And if somebody gave me an extremely soggy cone with, a little bit of vanilla on it, and then said, you know what, actually, let me take that back and let me give you a really nice double scoop with all your favorite flavors, I'd be pretty happy about that. Now, in the process, they might take away my ice cream. And that's exactly what these moderate Democrats are saying. We've got to remember that this is not about taking away anything. This is about replacing the system that we have that has been corrupted by a set of corporations who are interested in profiteering off of very sick people, and replacing it with a system that is more akin to almost every other high-income country in the world that would provide us access to high-quality health care where we could see any doctor we wanted without having to worry about basic things like these premiums and co-pays and deductibles and getting on the phone with private insurance bureaucrats to talk about why it is that we should get the care that we already paid for. This is a responsibility that we have as a society to finally solve this problem. We've been trying to do it for the past 70 years, and right now is the time where people are standing up. I am proud to see people like Senator Warren and Senator Sanders, who put this debate on the table, fighting for that issue right now. This is the responsibility we have. It's not about taking away. It is about replacing with better.
You mentioned the candidates taking on Republican talking points. Bernie Sanders talked about CNN doing the same. This is what he said.
Senator Sanders, then Senator Warren, because we both were mentioned.
The author
Senator
of
Sanders.
the Medicare bill, let me clear up one thing. As people talk about having insurance, there are millions of people who have insurance. They can't go to the doctor, and when they come out of the hospital, they go bankrupt. All right? What I am talking about, and others up here are talking about, is no deductibles and no co-payments. And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. At the end of the day, and by the way, the healthcare industry will be advertising tonight on this program.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders was referring to a question by Jake Tapper about whether the middle class should pay higher taxes in exchange for universal coverage and the elimination of insurance premiums. Dr. El-Sayed, your response.
Well, look, you have a situation in our country right now where you have huge corporations that are making billions of dollars every year who pay zero in their taxes. Now, they want to have the rights of corporations, but they don't want of people, but they don't want to have the responsibilities. And what we have to ask ourselves is, what does it look like if an Amazon was to pay the highest tax rate in this country, which is about 37%? They'd be paying $4 billion a year in taxes. Now, if all of those Fortune 500 corporations did the same, they weren't exploiting these tax loopholes that allow them to move money offshore and then get credit for it, what would it look like in terms of the money that we bring in? I think Senator Warren talked a lot about her wealth tax in some pretty important ways, because that generates the kind of fuel for programs like Medicare for All. This idea that there's this zero sum, that the middle class is going to have this tax increase, and all of a sudden their health care is going to get taken away. These are unfortunately Republican talking points. And one more point. I ran on a single payer plan for Michigan, and what we found is that when you take away those deductibles, those co-payments, those out-of-pocket costs from the everyday family, the average family of four earning $48,000 a year actually would save $5,000 on the top, because if you're not having to pay these costs, right, and instead you're paying a tax, in fact, you save money because the whole system becomes more efficient. So when you take those corporate inputs, when they actually have to pay their fair share, and you take the efficiencies gained by a single-payer system, it more than makes up for itself. We've got to push back on these talking points and remember that the goal of Democrats has always been to aspire to solve the problems that people face in their lives through our democracy, through our government. And this is exactly what Medicare for All would do.
We are continuing to cover last night's Democratic presidential debate in Detroit. Let's go to CNN moderator Don Lemon questioning Elizabeth Warren.
Senator Warren, I'm coming to you now. Last week, the FBI Director Christopher Wray said that the majority of domestic terrorism cases this year have been motivated by white supremacy. In fact, the alleged shooter in this weekend's attack in Gilroy, California, referenced a well-known white supremacist book on social media. How are you going to combat the rise of white supremacy?
We need to call out white supremacy for what it is, domestic terrorism, and it poses a threat to the United States of America. We live in a country now where the president is advancing environmental racism, economic racism, criminal justice racism, healthcare racism. The way we do better is to fight back and show something better. So I have a plan, for example, on education that says we have to build a better education system for all our kids, but we've got to acknowledge what's happened on race. So my plan has universal tuition-free college for all of our kids, but also increases the Pell Grants and levels the playing field by putting $50 billion into historically black colleges and universities. Cancels student loan debt for 95% of the kids with student loan debt and helps close the black-white wealth gap in America.
Thank you, Senator.
That was Senator Elizabeth Warren. The issue of reparations for slavery also came up during the debate. This is Don Lemon of CNN questioning Marianne Williamson.
Speaking of reparations, Ms. Williamson, many of your opponents support a commission to study the issue of reparations for slavery. But you are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion, payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. We need some deep truth-telling when it comes. We don't need another commission to look at evidence. I appreciate what Congressman O'Rourke has said. It is time for us to simply realize that this country will not heal. All that a country is a collection of people. People heal when there's some deep truth-telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with.
That was Marianne Williamson talking at last night's debate. Joining us is Mehdi Hasan, is a columnist for The Intercept and host of their Deconstructed podcast. He's also a host of Up Front at Al Jazeera English. Dr. Abdullah Saeed, former candidate in Michigan's 2018 gubernatorial primary election. In September of 2018, he founded the Political Action Committee Southpaw, Michigan, to help elect other progressive candidates in Michigan. And from Phoenix, Erica Andiola, Chief Advocacy Officer for Raices, the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. And I want to start with Mehdi Hasan. Now, I've been watching these presidential debates. I hate to say it now, going back to the first one between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon back in 1960. I've never seen so much emphasis in a debate on the issue of race and white supremacy and what presidential candidates might do about it. I'm wondering your reaction to the exchanges last night on this issue.
I'm glad they discussed it, and I'm going to disagree with my good friend Abdul Al-Sayed, what he was saying before the break, that he's glad they started with healthcare. I wish they'd started a whole debate on race, because that's where we've been for the last few weeks. You have a racist in the White House making racist remarks about members of Congress, people of color, and backed by the Republican Party, which is basically now a white nationalist party. And I think that should have been where the debate began. It's amazing that we didn't talk about that at the top of the debate. It's amazing we didn't talk about impeachment at all across the whole of last night. It didn't come up even once. But I'm glad they got to it eventually. And Elizabeth Warren put it best when she said white supremacy is a domestic terrorism. It's not said often enough. Marianne Williamson talked about reparations in the clip you played. I wish someone other than Marianne Williamson, who's a little bit kooky, let's be honest, and isn't really going to be President of the United States or Vice President of the United States, had made that case, although she did so eloquently and passionately. I'll give her that. But yes, we do need to talk about these subjects more often. You know, CNN talked about immigration reform, I think was their second subject of the debate. And I tweeted last night saying I wish the Democratic candidates, and there were only really two proper progressives up there, had answered by saying, you know what, let's talk about racism first, because it's racism that's underpinning this so-called immigration debate to begin with. But of course, as you've already mentioned, the framing of the debate was right-wing from start to finish.
And on that issue of race, this is an issue that Dr. Al-Sayed knows well, the combining of race in environmental racism, healthcare and racism. As a former head of the health department in Detroit, I wanted to turn to moderator Dana Bash questioning Marianne Williamson.
Ms. Williamson, what's your response on the Flint water crisis?
My response on the Flint water crisis is that Flint is just the tip of the iceberg. I was recently in Denmark, South Carolina, where there is a lot of talk about it being the next Flint. We have an administration that has gutted the Clean Water Act. We have communities, particularly communities of color and disadvantaged communities all over this country, who are suffering from environmental injustice. I assure you, I lived in Grosse Pointe. What happened in Flint would not have happened in Grosse Pointe. This is part of the dark underbelly of American society. The racism, the bigotry, and the entire conversation that we're having here tonight, if you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. We need to say it like it is. It's bigger than Flint. It's all over this country. It's particularly people of color. It's particularly people who do not have the money to fight back. And if the Democrats don't start saying it, then why would those people feel that they're there for us? And if those people don't feel it, they won't vote for us, and Donald Trump will win.
So that was Democratic candidate Marianne Williamson. Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, this is a story you know very well. Combine these issues from race to health care to the poisoning of an American city, Flint.
Yeah, look, I think Mehdi's right. There is no way to talk about health in America, or even healthcare in America, without appreciating the subtext about the question of who gets to have it and why. And in this country, we've had policy that has unfortunately said to us that we are going to allow the patterning of access to certain resources by race and also by socioeconomic position in accordance with where you sit in a particular framing of a history of racism in our country. I served the city of Detroit as health commissioner, and in my role I had to rebuild a health department that had been shut down because a set of policies that took away the right to self-governance for people in the city of Detroit, just like happened in Flint. And I used to do a lot of work in 48217, that zip code that you talked about at the top of the hour, because that was the space where environmental racism was at its worst. You have this combining and concentration of the pollution that's put out in the air that people have to breathe, that literally we're burning black stuff from the ground into the lungs of children, and we don't think about that as a health issue. When we think about what we can do to address the systematic racism in our country, we have to remember that there is a 10 to 12 year life expectancy gap between a white American and a black American in this country. Solving that is about addressing what causes the ill health in the first place in places like 48217, in places like Flint, and also making sure that people have access to the ability to heal, which is what healthcare is. But the point that Mehdi made is a good one. We cannot ignore the way that race plays its role in shaping who gets to have basic things like healthcare. And when we stand up for something like Medicare for All, what we're saying is everybody ought to have it. It shouldn't matter how much you can pay for it. You should have it because you are a human and you are a resident of our country.
We're also joined by Erica Andiola of Raíces. Erica, I wanted to get your reaction to the debate. It seemed to me that compared to the first round of debates, the Democratic candidates were a lot more muted in some instances on the issue of immigration and what their policies would be. I want to turn to an exchange between Montana Governor Steve Bullock and Senator Elizabeth Warren on immigration. This begins with a question from moderator Dana Bash.
Governor Bullock, about 2/3 of Democratic voters and many of your rivals here for the nomination support giving health insurance to undocumented immigrants. You haven't gone that far. Why not?
Look, I think this is a part of the discussion that shows how often these debates are detached from people's lives. We got 100,000 people showing up at the border right now. If we decriminalize entry, if we get health care to everyone, we'll have multiples of that. Don't take my word. That was President Obama's Homeland Security Secretary that said that. The biggest problem right now that we have with immigration, it's Donald Trump. He's using immigration to not only rip apart families, but rip apart this country. We can actually get to the point where we have both safe borders, where we have a path to citizenship, where we have opportunities for dreamers. And you don't have to decriminalize everything. What you have to do is have a president in there with the judgment and the decency to treat someone that comes to the border like one of our own.
You know, I just
Senator,
like to add on this.
He just said your plan is unrealistic. How do you respond?
You know, I think that what we have to do is we have to be an America that is clear about what we want to do with immigration. We need to expand legal immigration. We need to create a path for citizenship, not just for dreamers, but for grandmas and for people who have been working here in the farms and for students who have overstayed their visas. We need to fix the crisis at the border. And a big part of how we do that is we do not play into Donald Trump's hands.
That was Senator Elizabeth Warren, and before her, Montana Governor Steve Bullock. Erica Andiola, your response to the immigration portion of the debate.
Yeah, I definitely think it was a different type of debate this time around. And I do think, that the presence of Julian Castro in the last debate, in one of the last debates, was definitely a shift in the conversation, which I didn't see as much this time. And I really hope, I actually was listening also to the debate around, trade policies. And to me, it's like, how are you not speaking to what are also the push factors? How are you not speaking to why is even the reason that we have people coming into the U.S. From countries that we have done so much in, either because of our trade policies or because we have, been intervening in their government. And so a lot of these conversations are not, coming up. And to me, we keep going back to that same talking points of, we need a path to citizenship and we need to secure the borders. But in reality, there's a lot more to that. President Obama was exactly saying the same things when he was running for president. He came as a Democrat, deported millions and millions and millions of people. And now we're in this situation where that machine that he created was turned into a Trump machine, which is even worse for the immigrant community. And to me, it was just really, really shameful to see that none of the actual candidates are saying that. And to me, it's scary because I don't want to have another Democratic president that's going to act like Obama on immigration and that is not recognizing the reason why people are actually migrating here.
I want to turn to Bernie Sanders on immigration.
The main point I want to make is that what Trump is doing through his racism and his xenophobia is demonizing a group of people. And as president, I will end that demonization. If a mother and a child walk thousands of miles on a dangerous path, in my view, they are not criminals. They are people fleeing violence. And I think the main thing that we've got to do, among many others, and Beto made this point, we've got to ask ourselves, why are people walking 2,000 miles to a strange country where they don't know the language? So what we will do the first week we are in the White House is bring the entire hemisphere together to talk about how we rebuild Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador so people do not have to flee their own countries.
Thank you, Senator.
Erica Andiola, if you could respond to what Senator Sanders said.
Yeah, Yeah, and this is what I'm speaking to, right? Why are, to me, why is not the entire Democratic Party already recognizing that there is something bigger than just talking about securing the borders and sending more Border Patrol agents or sending the military or a lot of the things that we have done as, within the Democratic Party and in the Trump administration. We are not actually talking about what are the real issues and how we can actually solve them. And to me, it's super important to have these conversations. And perhaps a lot of Democrats are not every Democrat cares about immigration, but I can say that a lot of people in our community who are supposed to be right now feeling, like they should be going out to vote, whether it's in the Latino community or people of color, we need people to go out and vote in November of 2020, and that's going to happen if we're actually talking to them about the issues that they care about. And immigration is definitely one of those issues that a lot of people in the Latino community and other communities are really waiting to hear what's different. And like I said before, that we're not going to have another Democratic president that's going to deport a record number of people, and that, yeah, we are decriminalizing people who are coming into the U.S. because they are coming for a reason. They're fleeing violence and many other issues in Central America, as Bernie mentioned. And, at the end of the day, we need to have a different strategy because the one that Democrats have used in the past has not worked.
And CNN itself, Erica, in the way that it framed the questions around immigration, you saw, for example, Bernie Sanders taking on CNN around health care and saying that they're using Republican talking points and framing their questions. What about immigration?
Yep. In many ways, some of them were doing the same thing. One of the comments that to me was just, I couldn't help myself from laughing. That people need to find the doorbell, and I even tweeted like, where is the doorbell? Because my family couldn't find it, and a lot of people who represent Raíces can't find it at the border. And again, it's just to me this frustration that I feel that even within the Democratic Party, a lot of these issues have not evolved, and they're not going to convince our communities. They're not going to convince the people who right now need to be, feeling pushed, or not pushed, but motivated to go out and vote. And if we continue to hear the same things from Democrats that we just need to secure the border, it's not going to make a difference because we don't want another President Obama. He didn't do a good job on immigration. He might have done a lot of other really great things for America. Immigration wasn't one of them. And I really hope that tomorrow, or today actually, in the Democratic debate of tonight, that there is a recognition that Obama deported a lot of people, even being Democrat, and that's not going to happen again in the next administration.
I want to go to another clip from Tuesday's Democratic debate. This is moderator Jake Tapper questioning former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper.
Governor Hickenlooper, you ran a Facebook ad that warned, quote, socialism is not the answer. The ad also said, quote, don't let extremes give Trump 4 more years. Are you saying that Senator Sanders is too extreme to beat President Trump?
I'm saying the policies of this notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans who many of them don't want to give it. Many of them do want to get rid of it, but some don't. Many don't. Or you're going to the Green New Deal, make sure that every American is guaranteed a government job if they want. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Sanders, you are a proud Democratic socialist. How do you respond to Governor Hickenlooper?
Well, the truth is that every credible poll that I have seen has me beating Donald Trump, including the battleground states of Michigan, where I won the Democratic primary, Wisconsin, where I won the Democratic primary, and Pennsylvania. And the reason we are going to defeat Trump and beat him badly is that he is a fraud and a phony, and we're going to expose him for what he is. The American people want to have a minimum wage, which is a living wage, $15 an hour. I've helped lead that effort. The American people want to pay reasonable prices for prescription drugs, not the highest prices in the world. I've helped lead the effort for that as well.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Hickenlooper, I want to bring you back to respond.
So, again, I think if we're going to force Americans to make these radical changes, they're not going to go along. You throw your hands up, but you haven't I can do it. But you haven't implemented the plans. Us governors and mayors are the ones that we have to pick up all the pieces when suddenly the government's supposed to take over all these responsibilities and there's no preparation, the details aren't work. You can't just spring a plan on the world and expect it to succeed.
Senator Sanders.
John, I was a mayor, and I helped transform my city. I have some practical experience. Second of all, interestingly enough, today is the anniversary of Medicare. 54 years ago, under Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress, they started a new program. After 1 year, 19 million elderly people in it. Please don't tell me that in a 4-year period, we cannot go from 65 down to 55 to 45 to 35. This is not radical. This is what virtually every other country on earth does. We are.
Thank you, Senator. I want to bring
out.
That was an exchange from last night's debate between Senator Bernie Sanders and former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Mehdi Hasan, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. React to their exchange and to the reality that Donald Trump is trying to run against what he appears to believe is a tide of socialism sweeping across America.
Well, on that line about what they want to run on, Pete Buttigieg had a good line last night about how whether you run as a socialist Democrat or as a conservative Democrat, the Republicans are going to call you crazy, left-wing, radical socialist. So run on what you believe in. Don't just run on what Republicans are going to say. And I thought that was a very good line from Pete Buttigieg. Just on Hickenlooper, though, let's take a step back. What is the point of John Hickenlooper? What is the point of John Delaney? What is the point of Tim Ryan? Why are they there on stage? It's irrelevant. I mean, let's be clear. It's a complete waste of time. They were there to act as kind of right-wing foils for Sanders and Warren on this kind of CNN entertainment debate. Delaney is polling at something like 0.7%. He's 14th in the race, and yet he got to speak more last night probably than he gets to speak at home on an average Tuesday night. It was absurd. And I just find this whole framing of the debate where you have, people asking, Hickenlooper, is Bernie Sanders too extreme? We have people, even here on this show, we've all internalized the rhetoric. We refer to them as moderates. Sorry, what is moderate about an out-of-touch multimillionaire like John Delaney? There's nothing moderate about him, because the implication, therefore, is that Warren and Sanders are extreme, when in fact, when you look at the polling, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are more in line with mainstream American opinion on health care, on tax cuts for the rich, on climate change, on immigration reform, than any of those candidates who are basically polling at 1% and represent the 1% on stage.
I mean, you're right. The first question was framed to Bernie Sanders referencing John Delaney, which meant he would go second. I want to turn to the issue of nuclear weapons policy. This is the debate moderator, Jake Tapper.
Senator Warren, you want to make it U.S. policy that the U.S. will never use a nuclear weapon unless another country uses one first. Now, President Obama reportedly considered that policy, but ultimately decided against it. Why should the U.S. tie its own hands with that policy?
Because it makes the world safer. The United States is not going to use nuclear weapons preemptively, and we need to say so to the entire world. It reduces the likelihood that someone miscalculates, someone misunderstands. Our first responsibility is to keep ourselves safe. And what's happening right now with Donald Trump, as they keep expanding the different ways that we have nuclear weapons, the different ways that they could be used, puts us all at risk.
Governor Bullock, your response to Senator Warren's proposal to the U.S. never use a nuclear weapon first?
I wouldn't want to take that off the table. I think America's strength, we have to be able to say that. Look.
And that's Montana Governor Steve Bullock and Senator Elizabeth Warren. Mehdi Hasan.
I mean, Steve Bullock went on to talk about nuclear weapons, which reminded me of George W. Bush in his kind of folksy ways. Look, I'm glad Elizabeth Warren has moved to the left on foreign policy. Foreign policy, I wish we could have had a whole debate on foreign policy. I find the format of these debates so frustrating because you have a ludicrous number of candidates on stage, 10 candidates, and you're trying to touch on all these different issues across the course of the night. And I wish we could actually drill down into some of these issues in more depth. Like Abdul said, I'd love to have a healthcare debate where we could talk about that issue as a whole, a foreign policy debate where we can get into some some of this stuff. We touched on Afghanistan last night and then moved on. We didn't even talk about Israel-Palestine. And on nuclear weapons, Elizabeth Warren is completely right to talk about, not having this ridiculous preemptive policy. Bernie Sanders has been the most progressive candidate on foreign policy by a mile. What's interesting about foreign policy in this Democratic election year, in these primary debates, is that in 2016, Bernie dominated on domestic policy. Now everyone else has kind of pulled his direction. Last night's debate was a reflection of how Bernie Sanders has dragged the Democratic Party leftwards over the last 3 years. But what's interesting is he hasn't dragged them leftwards on foreign policy yet, but he's moved out there. He's saying things about foreign policy. I'd love to have heard the candidates respond to Bernie's proposal last week that you use US aid as leverage to force Benjamin Netanyahu to end the occupation. I'd love to have heard what the other 9 candidates, including Senator Warren, would have said about that. But we didn't get to Israel-Palestine. I guess lack of time, lack of interest.
And very interestingly, this is Detroit. This is where Rashida Tlaib comes from. I don't know if that's what President Trump meant when he said she should go back to where she came from. But we're going to turn to this issue of foreign policy now when CNN's Jake Tapper asked South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg about the war in Afghanistan.
Will you withdraw all U.S. service members by the end of your first year in office?
We will withdraw. We have to.
In your first year?
Yes. Look, around the world, we will do whatever it takes to keep America safe. But I thought I was one of the last troops leaving Afghanistan when I thought I was turning out the lights years ago. Every time I see news about somebody being killed in Afghanistan, I think about what it was like to hear an explosion over there and wonder whether it was somebody that I served with, somebody that I knew, a friend, roommate, colleague. We're pretty close to the day when we will wake up to the news of a casualty in Afghanistan who was not born on 9/11.
Governor Hickenlooper, you disagree. You've said that you're open to keeping some service members in Afghanistan beyond your first term.
I look at it as a humanitarian issue, and with all due respect, you're looking at the condition of women. If we completely pull our troops out of there, you're going to see a humanitarian disaster that will startle and frighten every man, woman, and child in this country. And I don't think, we have troops in over 400 different locations around the world. Most of them are small, they're peacekeeping, they're not greatly at risk. We're going to have to be in Afghanistan. Look at the progress that's happened in that country. We're going to turn our backs and walk away from people that have risked their lives to help us and build a different future for Afghanistan and that part of the world.
That was former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper and South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, their exchange over Afghanistan. I wanted to ask Mehdi Hasan, react to their exchange, and also that they talked about the U.S. troops in Afghanistan, but not much mention of all of the carnage and the deaths that have resulted from this disastrous long-term U.S. occupation there.
Indeed. And, just to go back to my earlier point, John Hickenlooper, why do we care what John Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado, thinks about Afghanistan? What does he actually know about Afghanistan? It's interesting, Pete Buttigieg speaking there as a former veteran, talking rightly about the fact that there are now people serving in Afghanistan who weren't born on 9/11, and we're going to have the first casualty at some stage, which will be deeply tragic and deeply frustrating.
Although
he said
there
he would
have been
get troops out.
countless number of Afghan children who have died there who were born after 9/11.
Very good point, Amy. And we never talk about the victims of American wars, even at a Democratic primary debate, because those people are unpeople. They just don't get covered, unfortunately, in the mainstream U.S. media or by Democratic presidential candidates, with some rare exceptions. And that's part of the problem. There wasn't a proper discussion about endless wars. That was my problem with the debate format. We dipped in and out of subjects. We didn't take a big picture approach, which is, what is U.S. foreign policy? What is it for? What is the next when is the next president going to use force? Under what circumstances? Which wars are we going to end? Hopefully, most of them, if not all of them. We kind of, jumped in and out. Nuclear war, Afghanistan, here and there. And, asking people like Steve Bullock and John Hickenlooper what they're going to do when they're never going to be president and they know nothing about foreign policy. So, yes. And Pete Buttigieg had a good line, by the way. I don't know if you heard him when he said, I want to be on the debate with Donald Trump because I want to be able to stand there as a veteran and stand next to a guy who pretended to be disabled to get out of fighting in Vietnam. Donald Trump and his famous bone spurs, which I thought was a good line. But then I remembered, sadly, 2004, the Democrats put up John Kerry, the great veteran, against George Bush, the chicken hawk, and it didn't work.
Let's go back to Senator Sanders last night when he praised rival Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Now, Elizabeth is absolutely right. If anybody here thinks that corporate America gives one damn about the average American worker, you're mistaken. If they can save 5 cents by going to China, Mexico, or Vietnam, or any place else, that's exactly what they would do. As president, let me tell you what I will do. These guys line up at the federal trough. They want military contracts. They want all kinds of contracts. Well, under my administration, you ain't going to get those contracts if you throw American workers out on the street.
Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, if you respond to this, and then we're going to go around the round table to find out what you want to see tonight in the next of the 10 candidates that are running in the Democratic presidential primary.
Yeah, I want to make a point about what Mehdi was saying. We make this differentiation between foreign policy and domestic policy when our foreign policy has dominated so much of our budget. We are involved in nearly 80 countries in the world, 14 of which our troops are seeing active combat. That costs a lot of money. And beyond that, we are shipping weapons abroad. We are subsidizing foreign military. That is all money that's being used, like you said, Amy, to kill children abroad, when we could be using that same money to save children's lives at home. And we're not doing that. And that's the point we have to be making. But on that broader point, the dominance of corporations in the ways that they have lobbied our government to make policy that is fundamentally about moving American materiel into countries where it doesn't need to be, into selling our healthcare system to the highest bidder, these corporations who have dominated it, into making decisions about who can and can't have prescription drugs, basic things that people need in their lives. This question of whether or not we're willing to deal with the system of inequality and the ways that corporations have created that really is the differentiator between people like Senators Sanders and Warren and the other folks. And are we willing to deal with that system?
Erica Andiola, what you want to see tonight, the questions put to Biden and Harris and Booker and Castro?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope, again, that they can continue to speak to, to racism. And I am particularly interested also in, hearing from Biden and a few others, hopefully from Biden, that, they are not going to repeat Obama's mistakes on immigration. And I also hope that, we can hear some, or at least a question on Puerto Rico, given what just happened in the island, that I was completely shocked that there was absolutely no mention of what just happened, in Puerto Rico, and what we should be doing as the U.S. to continue to support the island.
Mehdi Hasan, you have 10 seconds.
I hope that Kamala Harris takes down Joe Biden again, because it's ridiculous that Joe Biden is still the front runner in the Democratic presidential race. As the year is 2019, he's out of touch on everything.
Mehdi Hasan, columnist for The Intercept, Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, former Michigan gubernatorial candidate, and Erica Andiola, Chief Advocacy Officer for ISIS. And that does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.